Today we're going looking at chord diagrams. Chord diagram is a diagram that shows a relationship between entities. So in this case, our entities are the four of the major airports in the US. That's Chicago, Atlanta, JFK, New York, and LAX, and the number of passengers between them. And that's what these ribbons in between the chords show. The other thing we're going to look at is a slightly jazzier tooltip than we've seen before. Okay, so the data that we're basing this on is from a Kaggle uh, visualization of airport data that I've cut down to data just including these four airports in 2008, which is a straightforward Python project and needn't concern us here because you've got enough to do with just the D3 stuff. So if you just take this data as read, and obviously there will be a link in the notes to the original data set for anyone that wants to pull anything more out of it. Okay, we'll start in the code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the headline here. So this will be airline passengers in 2008. It's too difficult to think of a secondary headline, therefore just leave it blank, because why would you torture yourself? The canvas should be square, really, because the chord diagram is round, and we're going to set the margin all around to 50. Again, because the canvas is square. There's going to be some similarities between some plots that we've seen before, and one of them is that a chord diagram, like a pie chart, is drawn from the middle out. Therefore, the plot is translated to the center of the canvas. So we translate by half the width and half the width. Get rid of primary data here. We'll be coming back to fill in our own data. Right now, we just want to make sure that the data is loaded correctly. Don't need X and Y scales. We need a color scale. Can leave that. I'm going to create a new visualization, obviously. Formatters are always useful. The axes can go. We need labels, but it's nearly as easy just to draw them again as to try and convert those. We don't need a legend. We don't need legend circles. We don't need legend text. We need a tooltip, so the tooltip survives. I'll go down now to the draw function, and our data source is different. This is called Big Four airports. .csv. And we're going to create, like we did for the heat map, we're going to use the columns attribute of a D3 CSV object to get our labels. So this is the same formula that we used in the heat map, data column slice 1, so that we're taking all the column entries bar the first. Now we're going to create an array called chord data, and we're going to feed the data from data into chord data. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to iterate over data, and for every iteration of data, which will be one array of objects, we're going to ask for just the object values, not the key value pairs, just the values. And again, we're going to leave out the first one, because that's the originating airport, so we don't need that. And we are now going to look at both our labels and our chord data to make sure that that's working as we expect, because obviously if there's anything wrong with the data at the start, everything will be wrong with your chart. So you cannot be too cautious about data. We launch the Fox. Option Command I opens the inspector. Click console, and there's our data appearing as it ought to. We have the labels, the four airports appearing correctly, and our the data that we'll be using to draw the chords is purely numeric. which is what we wanted. We didn't want any strings in there because that'd just blow the system. We need a matrix of numerical values. Okay, with that set up, which is to create the chord visualization itself. So we'll just close down the terminal and we'll get set. We change secondary category here to labels, very straightforward thing. Then for the visual, and we'll change the color scheme to scheme set 1. Why not? Now, a chord diagram is made up of 3 things, and they are the chords, the ribbons, and the arcs. The chords are essentially an object to hold the data. The ribbons connect the arcs to each other, but we draw the ribbons first because it's just how it goes. Okay, so we're going to create an object called chord, which is going to be D3 chord, the D3 chord object with a pad angle of 0.1. I'll put a link in the notes to the documentation for D3 chord. We're going to create now chord data object by calling chord with the chord data that we have, and we are going to log that to the console to take a look at it. We'll just kill these earlier console logs because you don't want the place too cluttered up. So launch the terminal, here we go, launch the Fox. Option Command I opens the inspector. We'll just blow that up a little. And we see we have an array here. And the array is comprised of objects with sources and targets. And the sources and targets each have the same keys. There's an end angle, a start angle, an index, and a value. So that's how it's like the mechanism for the pie charts. And that essentially is what it's based off, so that you create the angles around the circle according to the size of the data. Okay, that's great. We'll shut down this terminal again, and we'll go create a ribbon. The ribbon is an object that allows us to connect the arcs, draw from one arc to the other according to the traffic. But before we create a ribbon, we have to create a radius, which I should have done earlier, but I didn't. So we'll create the radius up here with the rest of the dimensions to keep things tidy. The radius, unsurprisingly, is the plot width divided by 2. What else would it be? Okay. And then the ribbon, there's a D3 ribbon object. Const ribbon equals D3 ribbon dot radius with the argument radius. And then to draw the ribbons, we have const ribbons equals plot select all path dot ribbon. Let's say select all paths that have a class ribbon. The data is chord data. And we join this data rather than enter it. And I'll just note that it's a join because joins are tricky. And then the rest goes as you might expect. There's a class of ribbon, and then like we did for the pie charts or the line diagrams, we have an attribute D, which is to say D here is drawing object. What is my drawing object? My drawing object is ribbon. So that ribbon is the same as this ribbon up here. That's the ribbon that we're talking about. You might want to change the name of it to ribbon maker. It might make more semantic sense. Set the opacity to 0.3 so it's quite light, because we don't want it to dominate the arcs. Basically, the ribbon should be more subtle than the arcs. And we use our scale color to fill, and the argument for scale color is D source index. So you remember every every element of the chord data array had a source and a target. Here we're looking at the source object, and within that we find the value for index, which is the order that the things are written in. Okay, let's see if that came out. And here it is, and you know, it looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Take a look at the inspector. Option Command I gives you inspector and a map. I see these are all paths with the class ribbon, as you'd expect. I shut down a terminal. We're going to draw our arcs. So to draw an arc, we need to create an arc object, just as we created a ribbon object and a chord object. And it's D3 arc, and you chain two methods of that, inner radius and outer radius. The inner radius is the radius plus 2. So we're now edging into the margins. The margins are 50. So this will allow us to add 38 to the radius. I did that wrong. That should have been 42. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So plot select all path dot arc data chord data dot group, not just chord data, it's chord data dot groups. And again, we join rather than enter. Make a note of the join. And then the attribute is classed as arc. The draw attribute D will be the arc object that we created up ahead. So this arc is the same as this arc. And that's the arc we're talking about. And we'll fill it according to D index. Scale color D index. We'll launch the Fox, take a look at it. Okay. Now that looks pretty good. One thing that we have to do, however, is we need to change the width and height because they're too big. So we'll change both width and height to 500, and that fits in our that fits in the window a little bit better. We look at the arc in the inspector, and again you see the paths, the paths at the top of the ribbon paths. Then we have 4 paths for the arcs. So the next thing to do now is to create labels for the arcs, which is straightforward and complex all at the same time. Okay, that's what we'll turn to next. So we're going to draw our labels. These labels for the arcs, which is the only place you can put a label really. So we plot select all text. Our data is chord data dot groups, and we join text. Make a note that this is a join because we're paranoid about joins. At least I'm paranoid about joins, and if you're not, you ought to be. Our X attribute here is going to be arc centroid. So there are 2 centroid values, which are the centroid of the middle point of any path. We saw these before in the pie chart when we were labeling the pie chart. And these are the same things here. Because remember that it was the D3 arc method that was used to create the pie charts, and it's the same method we're using here to create these arcs. So that's the X and Y placement sorted. We'll give it a class a label. We're going to give it a fill of white. And the text is D maps to labels D index. because the labels are in the same order as the index. So it's through the index we can get back to the labels. We launch your Python server. And we take a look at it and see how it came out. And it came out okay, but not great. Quite hard to see JFK there against the yellow. So we're going to try something that we tried in the heat maps that didn't quite work. Might work better here. And that is to give a stroke color. So we're going to set a stroke of black. We're going to set a stroke width of 0.5. And the hope is that that outline will make the text stand out a little bit better. Launch the terminal, launch the server, launch the Fox. And they do stand out a little better, but they're still not great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our CSS and we are going to style them from there to make them a little bit better. We've left over CSS styling here from the stack bar chart. So we'll get rid of all that because we don't need it anymore. All we need to keep are the section on the body and the tooltip. So the selector for the arc text is svg space g text.label, because we've given it a class of label. And we're going to set the font family to a display font, which is a big chunky font, which is obviously what you need in a label. And this font family, Impact Hattenschweiler, if that's how you pronounce Hattenschweiler, I hope so. And we'll set the font size to larger and go back to the Fox and take a look. Okay, and I think we're nearly there with that. I've seen code online or in a book somewhere where you can rotate the labels, but I don't really understand the math behind the label rotation or the code or whatever it is, and I'm unwilling to just paste in code when I don't understand it. I think it's bad practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the dy/dx, the small movement parameters that we've seen before, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask if we're going to use a ternary operator. We're going to ask if the centroid is greater than or less than 0. Sorry, we're going to ask it if it's less than 0. If it's less than 0, we're going to subtract 25 from where it currently is. If it's more than 0, we're going to add 25. And the same for the other centroid. So that'll move our labels in the x and y directions according to which side of the axis they're on relative to the origin. So if the I have my server is running on an iTurn. That's from preparing this. Don't worry about that. Launch the Fox, and we see that our labels have moved. We'll just check that again because it's hard to remember in your head where they were, where they weren't. They should move them back. So they certainly moved. And now they move out when we restore the code. We'll just put in a little extra margin because the bottom left, the GFK label is getting cut out. Change this to 75. And we'll increase the font size, make this X large rather than just large. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to increase the stroke width from 0.5 to 1.5 just to give it that bit more snarl. see how that looks. Okay, and that's better. Again, it's not perfect. I'm not happy where LAX is, but right now it's going to have to do, because the last thing ahead of us now is the tooltip. So here we are now back in the code, and you know the tooltip takes HTML. So the call to the tooltip, when you see it down here, yeah, HTML, and then it takes a tooltip text option. So we've just given it minimal HTML, but you can put in any HTML that you want. So we're going to flex our muscles a little here, and we're going to create a table, and the table will be displayed in the tooltip. So we get rid of this old formula here, and to create a table in HTML we can use the Emmet extension that it's a default with all modern IDEs, with all modern code editors. So we type table, then a right angle, a greater than angle, TR for table row, and TD times 3 for 3 table cells. Or is it 4 that I need? It's 3, yeah, it's 3. Okay, so we'll just copy that. Not copy it, we'll cut it. We'll save index to restore it to its original beauty. And we paste in our table cells. And then we copy the table row. So those 3, that row with the 3 cells in it, we copy that and we paste it twice. 1, 2. I'm going to change the first TD to TH for table header, so it'll stand out as a header. And the headings are going to be origin, destination, and passengers, because that's what we're going to show in the tooltip. And so this tooltip text function is going to take 4 parameters, origin and destination obviously, but the number of passengers in the origin are different to the number of passengers in the destination. So we have 2 passenger variables, O passenger, D passenger. So in the first, on the first cell, in the first row, we're going to go origin, destination, origin, passengers. And then in the next one, we're going to go in reverse, which is going to be destination, origin, destination, passengers. And that's how it works out, because there's back and forth between the nodes or the arcs or whatever way you want to describe them. So we'll just copy that down and switch the variable names. Just change the O to a D here. And I think we'll crank up the Fox and take a look. I'll just change that to ribbons, which is what we call the visualization. I should have just left it at viz actually, because I think the more you have defaults in this, the easier it is to understand. And of course I need to change the variables. So we had 4 variables that we have to put in. Origin and destination are going to be given to us by our labels, and the origin label is going to be D source index. The destination label is going to be labels D target index, based on the examination of the chord data that we did at the start. Again, you have to study how the data is arranged to get your tooltips right, to get these things to match up, or else it's just a nightmare. We put in our comma formatter to format the number of passengers, and this is going to be the origin passengers will be D source value, the destination passengers will be D target value. So source is origin, and source is origin and destination is target. So we change the arguments here, origin, destination, O passenger, D passenger. And now we launch the Fox and take a look at it. Okay, so our tooltip is showing correctly. The format is a little squished. That's fine. We can change that in the CSS. So back in the code, shut down the terminal, make some room for ourselves. I'll switch over to the CSS. And here is our tooltip data as existed from when we started. And what we ought to do is give this table an ID. So we go into the table tag here and call ID tooltip table. And then we can style that table in the CSS. So we're going to give it a width of 100%, and what that means in this context is that the table will fill the width of the tooltip. We're going to text align it to center. Sorry, we're going to text align it to left, and we're going to set border collapse to collapse. If you don't set border collapse to collapse, white space appears between the borders, and you don't want that unless you're doing some sort of retro tribute to the early 90s, when it was a miracle that any sort of table could appear at all. Well beyond that now, we're at the cutting edge. We'll increase the width a little because our text was a little squished. Relaunch your terminal, relaunch your server, relaunch the Fox. Take a look at the tooltip, and that looks a lot better. Now, we're just going to do one more thing. We're just going to do one more thing to the table. We have two more things to do to the styling, but we'll get around to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in a line, a horizontal line, in our table, and we do that by setting a border bottom value of 1 pixel of solid black. Kill the Fox, relaunch the Fox because CSS is inclined to cache. That looks good, but the outer border is a little off-putting now. So we're going to kill the outer border. I will increase the padding to 10. Just to make the table, just that bit more accessible. Okay, happy with that. Two things left to do now. We want to look at the color and the opacity of the ribbon. The color in general and the opacity when the tooltip hits it. So we'll go back to the code and we're going to go up to scale color. So the way that, sorry, not scale color, we're going to go up to the fill element of the ribbons, and the question of what the ribbon color is, it's decided by the order that they come in, which isn't the best decision. So what I'm going to do here is I'm putting in a ternary operator, and the ternary operator finds out which is the larger value, the source or the target value, and if the destination is the bigger value, then we're going to color it according to the destination color, and if the source is the bigger target, then that'll be the color. That's what this code does. And it's just, again, it makes the code more, it makes the graph more, it makes it easier to understand, basically, because there is that match, and that is one of the things that you want to see in a chord diagram. Which node is the dominant node? Forgot to turn on my server. The reason Python comes up so quickly there, by the way, is the up arrow. Use an up arrow to give you the last term to come up. Okay, so you can see that traffic leaving LAX is nobody sends more traffic to LAX than LAX sends out. Who knew? Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the opacity of the ribbon when the tooltip is fired. And the way we do that is we write D3, select this, called transition and duration. We'll set a duration at 250 because that is half the duration of the tooltip. Does it matter? I really don't know. If it matters or not, I doubt it, but maybe you can conduct your own experiments and reply in the comments. That'd be useful. So we set the higher opacity here to 0.67. And then on mouse out, we're going to select, we're going to restore it to its original opacity, which was 0.3. Kill the fox, run the fox. Okay, so you see how it's popping up better, but the opacity isn't being restored for some reason. Alright, I see what's the matter now. It's our old friend the arrow function, and the arrow function does not recognize this object. You see we have function ed in the first one, and we just have the arrow function here. So write function, kill the arrow. Why the arrow function doesn't recognize this, I have no idea. I think it may be part of JavaScript's sinister mission to drive me and people like me demented. But we've broken it this time, so thank God for that. That's our tooltip working, and our chord diagram is now functional. And that turned out pretty well. So if you like the channel, please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. If you hate the channel, I could do with the clicks. And I'll be back next week with another one. Peace and long life. Live long and prosper.